Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on what part of the world you're in. Excited to have so many people with the Venture Outfitter. We're making a special, bringing back a special guest, a friend of mine from for many years, co-conspirator for a group in Austin called the Bootstrap Network. And Bijoy Goswami is a long-term friend. I call him my brother of a different mother, just because we spent so much time together working with each other and on supporting entrepreneurs. We're going to hear from him today, talking about evolving business through a crisis climate. And what's interesting is, so we both started two different groups of entrepreneurs and then brought them together at one point. But it happened in the whole frame of 2008, 2009, which is, even in Austin, Texas, was a really hard, it was a downturn time. And it was an interesting time to actually start an entrepreneur group because there was such a need. You know, I'm convinced that the individuals that are most likely to make a difference in the world in a crisis that can take action the fastest are typically the entrepreneurs. Faster than governments, faster than large corporations. Entrepreneurs can rebuild and create. We're starting a series that we're gonna call Innovating from the Ashes, where we'll talk a little bit more about, you know, the whole idea of like, how do you actually build yourself back up? You build your community back up, you build your companies back up. And I'm real excited to have Bijoy be the person who's kicking these off because, you know, I've seen him in the trenches supporting entrepreneurs going through all the different throes of dealing with that. And it's exciting to actually have, you know, well, if it's going to be the worst of times and the best of times anyway, it's great to have him as a collaborator in doing that, because he, I know I've seen has been committed long-term to supporting entrepreneurs. So with that, Bijoy, let me hand it over to you. Welcome you, brother in arms on supporting entrepreneurs. And you know, you and I didn't really say specifically how we'd kick it off, but I know a lot of times conversation and getting at your insight about how working with entrepreneurs back in that time, and then the personal transitions that we go through as we're dealing with this sort of stuff. I'd just love to hear what you have to say about that.
Yeah, absolutely. Great to have everybody on the convo. Thanks, Kevin. I guess maybe, you know, maybe even since we've got a nice intimate group, we can, what's on your minds? What brought you into the, I know you guys do this regularly and so on and so forth, but what's top of mind right now for everybody? Can you intro and let us know what's going on for you and what's on your mind? I'd love to just get that as a container. I know Kristen sent out a link to the Lego story. I'm not sure if everybody got that link about the toys that made us. It's a series that's on Netflix, and I suggested checking out that episode about Lego. So I don't know if anybody got a chance to check out the Lego episode. But anyway, so just that would be a great way to get us going, if that's okay.
Yeah, so let's hear from someone.
Well, I'll go. I've kind of asked Bijoy this, you know, in passing, and he's kind of danced around the issue a little bit. And that is because I have a lot of ideas and, you know, a limited amount of time. But I've also, you know, I see those opportunities, and I guess I've asked, you know, how did you do it? Not in the context that I'm going to follow in your footsteps, but I'm looking for feedback and validation that says, hey, you know, it's possible to succeed in a non-traditional path.
Right. Gotcha. Yeah. More like some of the personal journey that Kevin was talking about, maybe, you know, related to our journeys, and then how does that relate to some of the topics? Awesome. Okay, cool.
Well, not just that, but I mean, from the outside, it looks like, you know, Kevin's got this, you know, everything wired together, and he's all over the world. You know that I want behind the veil, behind the curtain, not the Instagram feed, right?
Yeah. I'm not very good on Instagram anyway, so that's good. But I'm not sure was anybody on the call the last time that we did the call? Raise up the hands. Jetty was on the
Jetty and
call. Hey,
David
Jetty.
Potis were. I
David was
know
as
for
well. Yeah.
sure.
I think we talked about entrepreneur porn at that point, and Instagram is sort of the great current purveyor of porn, and I think the thing that's emerged for me is not just entrepreneur porn but life porn, where and what I'm not loving what we're going through, but what I'm loving that it's doing is it's causing us to potentially depornify ourselves from just random stories that are told to sell product versus actual real stories that are based on actual journeys and facts. So
Yeah, I think
that's a great.
There's an interesting catch about authenticity, and RD, I think that that you're going to see. I mean, one of the things I appreciate about Bijoy is his authenticity about the whole process. I myself, in one of these upcoming things, are going to be telling the horror story of what prepared me for this time, because I feel lucky that in my own walk with entrepreneurship, I got my ass kicked about 3 years ago. And, and the ass kicking went for some period of time. And so, yeah, it is. But the great thing about right now is authenticity is in. But
well, I kind of pinged Bijoy about, hey, if you've written books, what is your income streams? And he's, joked and danced around that a bit, but partly because I'm wanting feedback. I have a fairly interesting life story, and I've had numerous people tell me, dude, you really need to write a book, right? But I've also heard that nobody gets rich, writing a book. But there are paths out there that, yeah, the book won't make you money, but meeting people and connecting to people, consulting, all that sort of stuff.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, and I think, yeah. Paulina,
I was going to pitch in and say that you have to stop talking and actually do it. I've written a memoir, and I'm on a path, hopefully, to eventually get it published. But one way I bootstrapped it myself was to stop talking about it and actually start actively doing and putting things together. So take the time to figure out as far as why people think it would be a great idea, what experiences you can share, and just start jotting down a plan of what you actually would want to write about.
Kevin, how about this? This is Lindsay here. Just so you know, I actually am a writer. I actually have 7 books in print. I'm a news editor of 2 magazines. And it was hard to get here. I can tell you, it was certainly not a long runway and easy to take off. Hard work, like somebody else said. Why don't we do a meeting like this about writing and publishing books at some point?
Great idea.
That'd be great. I'd love to see that.
There's a lot to know, and a lot of people think just because I got a great story, I'll write it, it'll get published. That's what I would
know better than that. That's why I haven't just done it immediately.
Yeah.
Well,
most people think they have an interesting story, but actually, when it comes down to actually selling it beyond your family, nobody's interested. That's the brutal truth.
But there's an interesting thing, since I know a little bit about Lindsay's background, let me set a tone that I'm going to throw the pass over to Bijoy, because there's this whole transition thing that's going on, right? Everyone's in the water now. It 2 years ago when I was like I was shaking in the corner, dealing with the crap that had happened with business failure. It was like I was all alone, and everyone else was like cover of GQ magazine or whatever. The thing about Lindsay that's interesting is he's a 30-year 3M'er. Or at least 25. I don't know exactly, but I think 30-year 3M'er.
No, actually 35. It's even more embarrassing.
Wow. Cool. So
36.344.
What's interesting about that is he has this long history of being at 3M, channels expert. He actually is doing a lot of he's the TechRanch CMO, but then he transitioned himself into becoming an author, and not just an author of note. 7 different books. He's an expert in Roman history. And if you look at his LinkedIn, you see this, 35-year 3M thing below, but the whole transition. Bijoy's got a transition story. I've got a transition story. I see Jay Lee right here in the house from Korea. He's got a transition story. There is something about figuring out that transition story. We'll get Lindsay to come back and actually talk about the writing portion of it. But the thing that I actually want to set up right now is Bijoy's got an interesting perspective, especially with the stuff that he's got. He's got a couple different books in him. I've only read the first one. I don't think he's published the second one yet, but about the journey itself. Bijoy, maybe you could actually tell us a little bit about that whole transition as we discover ourselves through that process.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I will. I'm just taking notes as we're going around the room, or the rooms. So thanks for the comments, RD. Paulina, did you have anything that you wanted to talk about other than responding to RDs that's on your mind, Paulina, that
Well, I
you're
was
just thinking about right now?
as far as, so here's a good, and I feel like it will be at the top of everybody's mind. The mixed reaction to us reopening. I know that from my family's perspective, so I have I'm with my grandparents, and so both of them are 70s, 80s age,
Wow.
It's definitely a very high risk area. And then my mom, she's in her 50s, and then I have a baby brother. And so all of us in our family, including even the mayor of Austin, he's on the path of, he thinks it's too early to be just diving back into reopening things, versus the governor. He thinks that, we need to take a step forward. So I'm wanting to see as far as what is everybody's reaction to it, because the entire situation is not typical, but I also believe there's not a very black and white way to handle everything, given how complex the entire issue is. So I'm wanting to see as far as, apart from the feedback, what do people realistically think, how we would approach trying to move forward? And realistically, there's no way for everybody to be not surveillance, but there's no way to be able to have somebody make sure that every single business is abiding by the regulations. So what do we do?
Right. Got it. Okay, great. Courtney, Stephen, Lindsay, I know you got pulled in from the conversation from just the book angle, but what's on your mind right now? Like, what are you thinking about?
Well, I'm a mentor to a couple of companies through an organization called Startup, which is a LGBTQA group.
Yeah, Startup. Yeah.
So diversity, I think, is a very interesting angle to entrepreneurship that probably needs to be more explored. I'm helping a company in Mexico through a distribution initiative. It's going to be very interesting to deal with scale up. I think those issues will be top of mind for me too. So I think that I could hold the conversation by just thinking that those two things, the diversity and dealing with all those issues that throw up, because it's very interesting that looking at the number of people going down with COVID, it's minorities, particularly Latinx and Black people, who are suffering very much at the bad end of COVID. And a lot of the benefits are not going to them. So ironically, entrepreneurship might be a route to success for that community or those communities.
Got it. Awesome.
Yeah.
Courtney. Yeah.
Yeah. Hi. How are you? I came into the conversation a few minutes late, so I didn't.
Good.
I didn't get the setup. But
we're just asking for what's on your mind right now, and
absolutely.
Yeah.
Got it. So what's on my mind right now is really around personal positioning and placement, around how do I engage in something that seems really, really massive, right? And so when I look at the notion of entrepreneurship, I've been able to categorize myself as less of the one that is going to go solve an immediate problem or go address an immediate problem, and more like somebody that could be helpful in establishing platforms in ways, and I could participate to actualize these things. And so I look at all of the opportunities around, for me, COVID didn't, it's a bad situation, but what it really showed me is the level of stress that our traditional kind of institutions and supply chains and value chains operate. The problem was already there. And when you stress an already stressed system, it simply shines a spotlight. And I hate to talk in cliches about people have been awoken, but the truth is that suddenly we have more in common than we did before. And so what I'm looking at is what is my personal role and what is my capability to participate in answers, understanding what my personal limitations are and my, what my capacity is, and also understanding what my strengths are. How do I go be helpful? It doesn't have to be my idea, but if I'm the one that can help to realize or actualize it or make concrete connections that simply get the thing done, then that for me, then I'm satisfied. So that's really what I'm thinking about.
Beautiful. Yeah. That relates definitely to this macro micro tension. I mean,
Yeah.
Artie's bringing up the personal journey, and then we're talking, Paulina brought up this external macro reality that we're all dealing with, and then how do those things potentially come together, right? So that's great. Anyone else want to jump in, and before Pat or Stephen?
Sure, I'll jump in. So I'm in kind of a unique scenario right now. My business is actually doing well because of COVID, and the service we provide helps businesses.
What is that? That's great.
So I'm in the auto space. The name of my company is Recall Rabbit, and we help car dealers connect to fix recalls on their used inventory. And so, like an example, we have First Texas Honda here in Austin. We tell them what Hondas are sitting for sale at other dealerships lots that have recalls. And so right now we're literally being told by our customers that we're one of the only ways they're making any money because they can't sell as many cars. Consumers are worried about coming in for service, and it's allowing them to make money. So I'm really focused strangely right now on growth and scaling. We've seen a huge growth in the past probably 7-8 weeks, and just trying to balance that with keeping existing customers engaged and happy and making sure we're doing right by them, but also managing growth. So I know it's a weird scenario in a lot of the world right now to be a business that's growing, but I'm feeling very blessed and thankful. So, and I was going to piggyback on something, and I forget who said it. I think it was Paulina, but I was in Venture Forth a million years ago with Kevin, with another startup that I had launched that did not make it beyond Venture Forth very far. But there was a mentor in there that said something that was super, like, just illuminating to me, and it piggybacks on what Paulina said, is that he talked about, and I can't remember who it was, but he talked about, and he was a successful entrepreneur, launched a couple companies, and he talked about he had a brother who was full of ideas. And one time he had to just kind of like shake him and say, look, everybody has ideas. You need to move forward. And it's been something that really like a light bulb moment for me, that it's a lot of people talk about entrepreneurship, and to Kevin's point, it's not easy. It's a kick in the teeth a lot of times, but the only way you're going to make it happen is actually by making it happen and pushing forward. And it's tough.
Mm-hmm.
I think about, as I mentioned, my previous startup, we got into the Capital Factories Accelerator, and it was really interesting because it was a lot of very live Instagram. Like, everybody was doing great. You're like, this is not possible. We're all startups. Like, you cannot all be doing great and getting funding. And 2 weeks later, they'd be gone. Right. So I think the advice I would give to anybody in the space is be honest with yourself. Right. Like, it's okay not to be doing great. Don't listen. Everybody isn't doing great. Right. And don't feel bad because you're not. That's part of being an entrepreneur. It's going to be struggles. It just makes when things are good so much better. So.
That's
Nice.
one of the things that reminds me that when I had to deal with my depression and some of the underlying kind of crap that I personally bring to the game, because of the kick in the teeth or kick in the gut or the kick wherever it was, because it wasn't very pleasant. Getting to finally really work on that, I think that's part of the entrepreneurial path. That is part of the entrepreneurial path. It's not necessarily part of the business person's path, but it's part of the entrepreneur's path, especially in an environment like this. And we'll be spending a lot more time on that in future sessions, just because I just think it's so core to what we should be practicing and working on as an entrepreneurial community together. And, you know, it's partially also one of the things that I've always appreciated about Bijoy too, just because the authenticity of, I mean, he doesn't always tell his story about, you know, his first company, but yeah, that plus mine, you know, being here, creating wealth, destroying wealth, creating wealth again, destroying wealth again. I'm like, okay, what the hell? And then dealing with the underlying issues. A lot of times I think when, you know, to Stephen's point, to Paulina's point, getting stuck because of some emotional block as much as anything else. I think that's the reason that we fail to take action. It's not necessarily, you know, there's a difference between the failure to create the result, and there's a difference between the failure to take action. Sometimes that sort of stuff can get in the way.
Yeah. David, you were on the conversation last time. So what are your thoughts? Do you remember the conversation we had last time? And then what's on your mind now?
Sure. No, yeah, it was really helpful. What we talked about last time. I mean, right now, even though I'm in the healthcare sector here in Mexico, there's I don't know if it's the same thing in the U.S. There's a lot of you know, the hospitals here in Mexico, they tend to work, and I guess it's okay, especially because of the situation right now, as like very high operating silos. So they're very focused in the operation, what they have to do inside. So what we offer them is tools to engage with their patients, and tools for you know, improving the patient journey and patient experience. I always say that patient journey doesn't only affect patients, it also affects healthcare providers. You know, as a patient lost in a patient journey is a patient lost for a healthcare provider. So right now, with a lot of uncertainty, and there's a lot of information, sometimes even fake news about COVID, and sometimes people being you know, paranoid about the situation. What we offer is for healthcare providers to actually give tools to guide their patients, and to even and also most importantly, to create a kind of a visual triage, so it can help with saturated hospitals and things like that. But what I've been experienced with potential customers or customers that I was close to closing before the pandemic is that, I mean, the you know, the unified answer is, you know, right now we're focusing on treating patients. We are not going to invest in this right now. So, I mean, even though that we're doing okay, I mean, in that sense, we actually applied a lot of what we talked about last time about bootstrapping, in the sense that how to go back to basics. So instead of implementing our platform, our patient relationship platform, which obviously has a cost for our customers, go back to simple strategies of how to attract customers, and how to customers meaning patients, how to attract patients for our current customers, and how to implement more solutions that can help them. So in that sense, we're okay. But at the end, one of the things I'm still struggling, and I guess it still has to do with, even though we talked about this last time about, you know, the entrepreneur porn, there's still, I mean, I still have to battle with that in my head, in the sense that I have to remind myself that even though sometimes I see, you know, in social media and you know, on the internet in general, you know, people doing successfully, and they're doing this and doing that, and I feel like the world is going at a faster pace than I'm going. So I'm still trying to how to manage that personally, in terms of, you know, controlling my anxiety and things like that. But in that sense, I mean, I'm just trying to, like, I think, like, all of you guys trying to figure out how to manage the situation and how to get through this.
Got it. Yeah. You know, that might be maybe a good jumping off point, because I know Kevin was talking about the journey that we've had, and then something that seems to be emerging from just him going around the room is, you know, this personal journey that we're on. and then the macro situation that we find ourselves in, with regard to this COVID swamp, and how do those two things come together, you know? And I think that's what is interesting and difficult, is that the part that I think for me has been fascinating, and observing myself, observing, you know, entrepreneurs were a part of what I observed, but I grew up in India and Taiwan and Hong Kong. And what I would observe, what I didn't realize I was getting exposed to, was how we construct our reality. I mean, and, you know, whether it's a personality or how we understand the world around us. And what I didn't realize was I was being exposed to a number of different models for how to view the same thing. And it's actually interesting, because if you look at the world, you know, even 100 years ago, it was a much simpler world, because you had a very finite set of ways to look at the world. And right or wrong, those ways dominated, and most people simply were receivers of those constructs of paradigms, or models, if you like, and then you sort of lived your life inside of that. And the challenge of the porn stuff that we just talked about, and how everybody's doing, and so on and so forth, is one of the challenges that informs that, is that that's just exploded into a million different ways of looking and seeing things, and that creates a real challenge, because you have to navigate your own journey, and somehow get through your journey, enjoy your journey, get what you want out of that journey, whether it's personal or entrepreneurial, and you have to do it in the context of not only a ton happening in the world, but us getting a lot of billions more bits of information about all of that, what's happening, and then having to parse all that with our own internal constructs. And I remember at one point, a number of years ago, when I was talking about the entrepreneurial journey, and I, you know, sort of like, you know, people want to reduce things down into golden hammers, you know, what's the one thing that matters? And sort of, you know, it was like this whole idea that you have a set of mental models that you're operating from, and the ability to examine your own models, and the not only the ability, but the decision that your models are arbitrarily constructed, or constructed not necessarily arbitrarily, but personally, from the parents you had, the society that you lived in, the journey you lived, the bits of information you got exposed to, and that those are going to color the way that you respond to life and to your journey. That, I think, is sort of, you know, it applies on a personal level, it applies on a macro level, it applies on sort of all the different levels. And what I didn't realize was that that's the most important question that I've been asking personally, is how do I Bijoy, right? As a verb, how do I be joy, and how do I Bijoy? That's one of the things about your name, is that when you have a name like Bijoy, you're constantly trying to find out ways to introduce yourself so that people go, what? You know? And having grown up in all those different countries, I got different names. I was given different actual versions of my name. As I have a Chinese name, Bijoy, and Bijoy actually means philosopher. And so my Chinese 7th grade teacher was giving me my in Chinese, your first names are 2 characters. So if you have a last name, you have, you know, a 1 character last name, like Gao or Wang or Jing. So, and, you know, whatever that might be. And then you have a first name that's two letters, 2 characters. So Gao Bijoy is my fully expressed Chinese name, which Gao from Goswami, which actually means tall, and then Bijoy, which means philosopher. So I'm the tall philosopher, which I'm not very tall, but you know, I think the philosopher part was really profound. And I think, so that's what's interesting, is that we have to understand that we're living inside of either implicit or explicit models, right? So just as much as the physical world around us and the physical reality of life, it's the models by which we are parsing that reality that are going to guide everything about how we see things. And within the entrepreneurial journey, there's a whole set of models out there that are about what is the entrepreneurial journey and what are you doing and what's it about and what are the metrics of success. You know, the recent, I think, twist and turn that we've taken in the last 5 years that COVID potentially is unraveling and helping, so that we've disassociated from what entrepreneurship is. When Kevin and I were involved in setting up Bootstrap Austin and building community for entrepreneurs, there really wasn't, there was sort of one dominant story of entrepreneurship. And that was that you wrote a business plan, and then you raised, you had this really well thought out business plan. And then you, I guess you went out to investors and you got funding from those investors, and then, hey presto, it was done. You were successful. Everything was focused on investment, and then with Bootstrap, and with that, I had gotten exposed to bootstrapping at college at Stanford, and it was like, oh wait, there's another path that's involved in this journey, but it's not sort of the dominant path that's out there, and yet everybody talks about this other thing. What David was talking about, it's like, oh yeah, we're successful and everything's great. And we had this first meeting at the Ginger Man Pub in Austin, and it was like everybody was puffing up this story about where they were on this journey, and over time we had actually started interacting with a guy named Darius Majubi, who is out of UT, and he said, there's this valley of death, and valley of death, what is that? Oh, that's the stage that all entrepreneurial ventures go through. And oh, okay, well that's interesting. Well, I'm definitely, and what is that about? Well, you don't have any customers and you're still struggling, or but you've actually taken the leap and you're in the middle of this. And it was like, oh yeah, that's actually where I am at, where I am. I'm in this valley of death. And so the minute we started to circulate that concept of the valley of death with our group of fellow bootstrappers, it became this liberating thing, right? Because I have to tell you a story and make up some bullshit. I could just tell you, hey, I'm in the valley of death, and here's my specific journey. Here's what I'm really dealing with, in my valley of death. I'm here, and this is the nature of the reality that I'm in. And all of a sudden, it was this release. It was this, what I would say is it's a congruence, right? You were congruent with your current reality. When you're congruent with your reality, then you can actually take action and make progress toward a direction that you want to go, right? If you're not congruent with your reality, if you're telling yourself a story, if you are comparing yourself with others, then you're going to start getting confused, right? And if you're confused and you don't know where you are, then it's impossible to know where you're going to go. And with human beings, it's all about these mental constructs that we have, right? So let's look at the macro situation that we're in right now. The macro situation has to do with a biological reality, right? Nature doesn't give a crap about what we think about it. It's going to do its thing, right? Viruses have been around for millions and billions of years. Viruses actually are a very important part of the biological ecosystem. If you didn't have viruses, you wouldn't have, the seas wouldn't function. You just have a slop out in the seas. And viruses are, 8% of our DNA is viruses. Bacteria make up our right. So, but we as a set, especially let's say in the world at large, because in the 20th century, especially because of the advances in medical science and so on and so forth, developing the vaccines, we all got complacent about that. We didn't really think about the fact that we're living with nature, and nature is not friendly. We live in an insulated version of nature, which we thought, oh, that's fine, and that stuff is out there. Viruses, oh yeah, that's Ebola that happens in Africa. Why? Because we hadn't actually been exposed to that. At the beginning of this COVID stuff, I realized, oh, I don't know anything. I mean, I know enough to get. I got vaccinations as a kid, and I know something about SARS because it happened in Hong Kong. But that's the damn exactly. Damn nature, you're a scary guy. Yeah, exactly. So So, you know, I had to go on a crash course at the beginning of all of this. I said, I don't have a good mental model for what this whole situation is. And I need to go on a learning journey for that. So I started to get caught up on every single documentary I could and understand sort of what is the actual scientific understanding of this situation. And that has to be my guide, because I can't will my way out of this. I can't pretend that this doesn't exist. And especially if other people are going to construct realities that are not based on the reality on the ground, you know, we're gonna have to all live with that, right? Today, there's a set of people that are wanting to will themselves out of the reality of, starting from the very tops of government, out of the reality of what this situation is. And that is a very, very, very dangerous place, because, you know, I always found reality TV to be, it's an oxymoron, right? Reality TV. It's the exact opposite of reality. The whole thing is constructed. And when, you know, what was that? Where the island, what was that? The island, they put them all on the island, Survivor. When Survivor, you know, was like, I guess one of the first reality TV things out there. And I guess then, you know, then it was The Apprentice was one of those things. I thought, why are people watching this crap, right? This is just crap. This is all constructed. And of course, over time, first it was like, oh, this is sort of entertaining. But then you realize this is not reality TV. So we have a term, reality TV, that is actually the opposite of what that is. Okay, that's a real problem, because now we're using words to describe things that are actually not the actual literal meaning of those words. So the problem is, in a very developed society, in a developed economy, in a very developed place, you can bullshit your way through a lot of stuff. You can believe whatever the hell you want to believe and kind of walk around constructing your own reality. Even if that reality has nothing to do with reality, you can live inside that reality. And for the most part, you can kind of, you know, run around and get through. And a lot of what politics became in the last while is just these constructed realities, these fights that sort of aren't real. You know, oh yeah, I believe in this. Okay, that's great. But what is politics? Politics is actually life and death. Politics is the difference between, do you have a correct response to an understanding based on science of what's happening with viruses and how they spread, and what actions you then take, right? Why is South Korea, I mean, I know Jay's in South Korea, I grew up in Hong Kong, I also grew up in Taiwan. Why is South Korea, Taiwan, and Hong Kong just all over this stuff, right? Why are those three countries in particular doing so incredibly well with SARS? I mean, sorry, with COVID. It's because they went through SARS in 2003. And they saw exactly what happens with the same type of virus, the coronavirus. And they realized that if you don't stop this thing immediately in the parts, and you take it very, very, very seriously, it can go crazy. And so when this situation happened, they were ready because they had the right mental model for what this is all about. They have the right mental construct as a society, as a government, for what this is. In the U.S., we haven't had, and we still do not have the correct mental model for what this is. And so now we're going to replay history. There's a great phrase: those who don't learn history are doomed to repeat it, right? There was something called the 1918 pandemic, the flu pandemic. It actually, they don't know exactly the origins of it, but they think that the initial strain started in Kansas.
Can I just say you're one of the first people to finally say what is the most accurate. So I did some research and I wrote a blog post about it. Most people assume that there is an actual origin. There actually was never a proven origin. So thank you for that.
Yeah, exactly. And the fact that it even got called the Spanish flu was only because Spain was so transparent and open about their flu cases. And so everyone thought it was in Spain, but it was a lot of other multiple sources that happened. And the thing that happened with the 1918 flu pandemic that lasted for actually years is that they weren't able to they weren't able to take the right actions, and so this extended the actual depth of the disease. The amazing thing is we actually have the knowledge about what to do with these things today, but we aren't applying it because of other factors that we're allowing to influence the way that we're looking at things, right? The virus does not care about your political affiliation and your ideas about liberalism and conservatism. It doesn't care about it, right? But if you are going to perceive everything through the lens of politics, then you're the one that's going to live and die literally, right? Literally today, if you've been watching Fox News versus watching news, I call it FAUX news because it isn't news. If you've been watching faux news, then you have one reality that's been constructed for you. And if you've been watching news and actually researching and actually going down this other path, and you're not going to get your understanding from news, right? News is going to tell you a lot of what it is. Then you've got another reality, right? So the hygiene that I think is really interesting about this is mental hygiene, right? We talk about, we've all like, oh my gosh, I got to wash my hands for 20 minutes to 20 seconds. Physical hygiene. I've got to separate myself from other people. Otherwise I'm going to transmit, or they're going to transmit over to me. So we're relearning about physical hygiene, which is incredible. Like when I go to the bathroom and I see someone walk out without washing their hands, you guys know who you are. Hey, I'm like, what? This is like, I'm like, because I grew up in India, right? In India, people die of diarrhea every day because of basic sanitation, right? And so growing up as a country, I learned how to wash my hands, and so now, but we forgot about washing our hands. So we're relearning about physical hygiene, but physical hygiene is actually to do with mental hygiene, right? And so in a world in which you're going to be exposed to billions of bits of information, all kinds of people telling you this, that, selling you flogging products, as we as entrepreneurs are doing, it becomes incredibly important to look at your mental hygiene, right? What pieces of information am I allowing to come into my brain? Who is programming me, right? So you look if you sort of use this paradigm for a second, this idea of models, right? A very good analogy is we are basically robots, right? Humans are robots. We have been programmed by, number one, by nature. Nature gave us a bunch of programming, right? We have 200,000 years, not living in cities and farming and all that. That's 10,000 years. Very short amount of time that we've lived as humans in this current construct, in cities and farming and so on and so forth. We lived 200,000 years in tribes of about 150 to 200 people, right? Roaming around the plains of Africa and all over the world. So biology, and before that we were part of the animal kingdom, and we still are part of the animal kingdom, apes, so on and so forth, right? But we're not part of baboons, and we're part of a very particular set of the ape families. We're part of chimps and bonobos, but that means that we have certain programming that comes through, right? And that programming is that we're pro-social. The beauty of a group of 150 and the group of a set of organisms that work together is that we don't all have to do the same thing. You don't have this division of labor with other species that you have with humans, right? The group of 150 means that Kevin can be the fire starter, which is what we used to call him back in Bootstrap. I can be the person that takes care of the young. Someone can be the person that goes out and hunts or works on the spear, and we can divide our labor across the set. So human beings are pro-social. This is the technical term in science about this is we are pro-social. Now, pro-sociality has a positive and has a negative. Okay, that's part of our programming. In other words, we all know, right, that if we don't have a group, we are screwed. What do we do to people that have violated our arms? We isolate them, we put them in a jail, right? Why is that? Because we are programmed, engineered to be social. We're pro-social. But the dark side of pro-sociality is we are engineered to be social. So we're going to look at other people's journeys. We're going to look at everybody else and go, what are they doing? What are they doing? What are they doing? Should I be doing that? So that's a constant part of our programming that comes from 200,000 years of hunter-gatherer that lives today, that is both very helpful to us and also very harmful to us, right? Nature does not care about our well-being per se. right? It's just doing its thing, right? Nature is just going off and doing its thing. We are here today living underneath a set of programming that is literally installed in primal parts of our brain that guide our actions.
It was exactly that. That is what, just tying what Bijoy is saying right now to what he said at the very beginning. It's exactly that saying, I'm in the middle of the valley of death was so valuable. Bijoy, what are the other things we can actually do right now to overcome that programming?
Well, first of all, you've got to look at the fact that you are programmed, right? You've got to accept the valley of death of your journey of models, if you like, is that you are programmed, and that your programming is going to cause you to look at certain things. Look, none of us want to die, right? But we're all gonna die, right? Whether this virus kills you or not, or whether old age kills you, everybody on this call, we're all going to die. Now, nature has programmed us to kind of not even think about that, to avoid that, to postpone that. But the people that actually make the greatest progress in life accept death. They actually accept that you are already dead. Like, that's what the Buddha did when he went out into the forest, right? The proverbial forest. Even in the Christian story, what happens to Jesus? He goes and he dies on a cross, and then he's risen, he's born again, right? So we have a story to help us to understand that the fear of death is a motivating factor that causes us to tell ourselves a bunch of lies, right? So the first part of this journey is you've got to really understand that you are the result of a set of programs, whether biological, whether cultural and social, whether parental, and then whoever you're surrounded by, your friends and so on and so forth. You've got to be able to look at those models and start to parse things out. So number one, in terms of this particular situation that we're in, we are in a biological reality that has been the case and will be the case long after human civilization is gone, right? Biology is doing its thing, right? The planet has been creating and destroying life for about 500 million years, right? So we're sitting here at this very small moment of that, beginning to realize that we're part of this ecology, right? Now, that ecology and then our ability to react to that means that and because of the lack of consistent models around what we're supposed to do and lack of agreement, this situation that we're in is going to be prolonged much longer than it needs to be, right? If everybody locked down for 21 days, if everybody everywhere in the world locked down for 21 days, this would be done. But we couldn't
Do you honestly think that it would change? Because the virus itself wouldn't just disappear. I think the unrealistic aspect to all of it is that people think that just because we've been sitting cooped up, reopening means the virus all of a sudden has changed. It hasn't.
Exactly right. And so exactly right. So because we inconsistently got wind of this, and then now meanwhile this thing is all over the place, and because we didn't as an entire human society do this over 21 days, the virus still lives, right? It's going to keep going. And so we are going to prolong this experience for ourselves because we're all disagreeing on what we're supposed to do, right? And that means that for us as entrepreneurs or as human beings, we have to get ready for a longer haul, right? Than we would like this to be. A lot of the motivation for people about, oh yeah, reopen is because, hey, I'm done. I've been cooped up for 3 weeks. I'm done. I'm done being cooped up. I need to get out. Just because you're done doesn't mean the virus is done, right? So it's going to do its thing regardless. So we all have to kind of like sort of gird ourselves for the longer haul in terms of what this is, and stop doing happy talk, right? Just have to be like, hey, imagine this is going to continue for a long time. Now, as an entrepreneur, and as a human being, or an entrepreneur, where am I in this situation? Am I set up in a way that allows me to respond to this situation where it might be for the long term? Am I telling myself a bunch of stories that are not going to allow me to actually thrive through this? So coming back to the entrepreneurial journey, right? What is the entrepreneurial journey about, right? What is entrepreneurship? And back to this question of models, let me give you a definition of entrepreneurship. Entrepreneurship is creating new models, business models, that didn't exist before. Okay, entrepreneurship is creating new business models that didn't exist before. Now, if you start a small business and you say, I'm going to open up, a coffee shop on the corner, that is entrepreneurial, but it isn't entrepreneurship. Why is that? Because I already have a business model for what a coffee shop is going to be, right? Somebody else figured out how to make a coffee shop work. I'm simply making a copy of that business model, and I'm going to execute that model. Somebody else did the hard work of creating the business model. Entrepreneurship is creating a business model that doesn't exist. Now, in the entrepreneurial journey, there's two paths. You can reduce it all down, all the noise. There's two paths to entrepreneur. So when you look at most small business out there, they're entrepreneurial, but they're not entrepreneurs, right? Most small business is not an entrepreneurial journey. Nothing wrong with it, right? It's perfectly great for someone to make 10 McDonald's franchises, and they'll probably make a lot more money than the entrepreneur, because the entrepreneur is out there trying to create a business model that doesn't exist. Everybody, the customer understands what to do with a coffee shop. It's great when you have an existing business model that everybody understands, and you create one of those. I'm like this, right? Even in the most, how do people talk about their new ventures? They say, oh, it's like Uber for la la la, da 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 da, right? Why are we doing that? Because we're trying to say, oh, it's like a business model that already exists, right? We're trying to de-risk ourselves by saying it's like this thing that you already know about, right? But entrepreneurship isn't that. Entrepreneurship is the discovery of a new business model that didn't exist before. What is a business model? A business model is just all the ways that value is created for an end customer by an entrepreneur or a team, right? There's just two entities that matter in an entrepreneurial venture. In any kind of business, there's a customer and there's the supplier of the value. And then there's this interaction between those two. And when you, the supplier of that value, have found the need that customer has, right? You have this magical thing called a sale. You have an exchange of goods for certain money for goods or services, right? So the entrepreneurial journey is the journey of discovering new business models that haven't existed before. Now, the reason I never give anybody any advice about what they're supposed to do about a book or not a book, or writing a book or software, this is because that job is yours, right? The job of discovering that business model is yours. Now, the most important person that you have to solve this for is not your customer, it's yourself, right? It's you. You are the actual first and most important customer. And what does that mean? It means, well, what do you actually want out of this journey? Like, what are you actually going for, right? Because the entrepreneur porn thing is like, Elon Musk, he's a billionaire, he runs around, he's rockets. I mean, that's just some vacuous crap that is sold by Silicon Valley. And I really wouldn't want Elon Musk's world. Like, the life that he lives, he thinks he's like the smartest guy in the room and randomly tweets crap out into the world. Like, why would I ever put that guy up in my set of heroic journeys, right? Elon Musk is blocked on my Twitter feed. Okay, because I think because I don't want mental hygiene. I don't want his crap in my world, right? I went to Stanford, right? I went to Silicon Valley. I was at the heart of Silicon Valley for 4 years, and I studied the history of Silicon Valley, right? And Silicon Valley comes out of the gold rush. And that's California, 1849. The 49ers were the gold rush. California was built on people who went there with nothing but the clothes on their backs to try to make it. And the next day, if they struck gold, they would now be rich, right? That's the mindset of California, right? That's why Mark Zuckerberg moved from Boston to California, because he's like, I want to make it big. I want to be an instant overnight success. That is at the heart of what California does, whether making people into rock stars in Southern California and making them into billion-dollar brands, or in the North, technology, right? So before it was gold, then it became silicon, and now it's, the derivatives of silicon, it's software technology, right? So they are looking for that highly scalable thing. But the problem in the world today is that we look at that and we say, that's entrepreneurship. No, that is 0.000000001% of entrepreneurship, and 99% of the ventures that are started in California fail by design. They're meant to fail. And then you talk about the one person, the 5 people that succeed, and you say, oh, that's everybody else. No, it's not, right? Those people are very exceptional. They're exceptional. They're exceptional people, not because they are personally exceptional, but because it might be, but because they find themselves in exceptional situations inside of an exceptional ecosystem that is not going to be duplicated anywhere else in the world. And all of us digesting and reading all these books and crap and things like that come out of Silicon Valley is going to set us on the wrong path for what we are actually going to be able to do on our own personal journey, right? So what do we all talk about? I know TechRanch talks about this, and everybody, funding, right? Funding. It's the nonstop cry of, that has nothing to do with a customer. Funding has nothing to do. Funding has to do with, oh, I don't want to be in that valley of death. How am I going to get paid? Oh, it'd be nice because if I get an investor, hey, I can get paid every month. This is awesome. So that's a motivation for many entrepreneurs for funding. Why do you need funding, right? Oh, but because I haven't actually thought about it, right? I was programmed to think about the entrepreneurial journey in a certain way. And because I've been programmed to think about that, because it is extremely good at sharing its message out to the world and getting everybody on its path. Because what are they're doing the great sales job. Hey, come to Silicon Valley, come to Los Angeles, you will become an overnight success. Most of you are going to just be waiters at, in bars and restaurants in LA, but let's tell you about Brad Pitt and all the stars, and let's get you all excited about that one particular idea. So what am I saying? I'm saying I don't give a crap about being the next Elon Musk, right? I want to be the best Bijoy that I can be. And the Bijoy that I am is somebody that doesn't care about an extravagant lifestyle, right? I don't actually care about consuming some fine wine every day and jet setting off. I mean, I end up traveling the world, but not because it's some sort of programmed thing that I was told by other people that that's what I'm supposed to aspire to, right? So the start of this journey, before you get into entrepreneurship and before you get into all this stuff, is you've got to get to know yourself, right? And the thing is, like people will, oh, I know myself. I know I like this. No. You don't know yourself, right? You know yourself through a set of programs that have been told to you about what you're supposed to like, what you're supposed to be into, right? You grew up in a conservative or Republican or Democrat family, and so now you were programmed by that set of programs, and you're like, oh, that's me. Yeah, I believe in guns, and I believe whatever it is. You don't believe in that. You've been programmed to believe in that, right? You have to deconstruct all of that to figure out what are you about, right? And getting to know yourself is a really difficult thing because you have to get through all of these layers that everybody else has told you about what you're supposed to be and who you're supposed to be. And that's really hard because when you actually confront yourself, wow, this is actually who I am. You might realize who you are is completely separate and different from anything else that's out there in the world. That's actually the great news. Now you're making some progress because now you can actually begin to construct your own existence based on the things that matter to you, right? So what is that? Like, how does that process begin? For me, it began with, it's interesting because I'm wired a certain way. And my friend Bruce, who I want to start this company with, is wired in a totally different way. Now, because of that, he's going to go and take a set of actions in his life that are totally different than my action, right? We started this conversation and RD asked about, hey, what do I wanted to write a book, and Paulina piped up and said, you got to just do it. Okay. Those two things come from two different ways that we look at the world. One is a maven, what I call a maven way of looking at the world is I'm going to go analyze everything. I'm going to go sit down and think about it and develop it. And the evangelist way of doing the world is I'm going to take action. Everything is action. So I'm going to take action through things, right? Because we are wired differently, we're going to immediately see those things differently. But in an entrepreneurial venture, you actually need both of those things to happen, right? Courtney was mentioning this too, like, oh, I'm this person that can help solve problems, but I'm not necessarily the person that's out there in the front. Okay, that's great. Because now that you know who you are, you now know what you lack, right? So one of the myths of entrepreneurship is like, oh, I've got to do this all by myself. No, that's another bullshit entrepreneur porn thing that's been spread because, hey, in order to tell a story, I've got to talk about one person. If I have like 3 and 4 and the founder that left and actually contributed to the thing and then this other person, then I'm going to start, it's getting complicated. I just got to tell you how Bill Gates knew all about PCs and then he made Presto, Microsoft. It was awesome. And everybody else, right? We don't want to talk about the third founder at Apple who left in the early days, who designed their early logo, right? We don't want to talk about all the different setups. So we end up talking about Steve Jobs ad nauseum. Now, I think Steve Jobs is an awesome person, but I think Steve Wozniak contributed a ton to the journey and a bunch of others that did, right? So,
Joy, let me just ask real quick, just from the standpoint of, since we try to keep things to an hour, and I know we've had to have a couple of people drop off. Do we have, I'd like to do 2 things. Like I did last time, I've been taking notes and I'm going to do a summation. I'd like to actually have Bijoy get a chance to do a kind of a summation kind of, about, if you want to put a wrap around that, but maybe there's a question or 2 first before, just so we can have some interaction before I transition the program. Just wondering, anyone have like a reflection or a question for Bijoy just in hearing that?
Yeah, okay, if I may. One of the things that I also noticed, and I wanted to get your opinion on this, is that talking with, especially with VCs and even angel investors, they're looking for this startup that is almost, I want to say, perfect, in the sense that they don't need to do anything. They just need to put in the money and it will magically grow and things like that. And in my perspective is that, as a startup, there's a lot of, especially because, you are a startup, there's a lot of space to grow. So there's a lot of things that you still need to learn, or things that you need to improve and things like that. And, this is kind of has been my dilemma because at first I walked into with a couple of VCs and angel investors and whatever, and with this idea that, I still have to improve in this, we still need to grow. And that's why, I'm interested in working with you, not only because of the money, but also because of your experience and how to grow. And the answer that I've been getting a lot is like, oh, you don't have this and you don't have that. And we see these areas that are not, they're not well established. And there's a lot of potential, but yet you still need this. And that's, and I've been struggling a lot with that. Yeah.
Right. So on that, again, back to the business model, right? If you, there's a whole, I just sent you guys a link to the bootstrap map, which talks about sort of all the different steps and stages of an entrepreneurial journey till the growth stage, the magical growth stage, where it's all like, hey, what is that? That means you've discovered your business model. Now what you have is in Silicon Valley, you have a process in which it involved upfront before the business model emerges, right? Through the valley of death and the ideation process and the processes before that, they get involved in throwing capital into that. The rest of the world has no concept of that. So they're waiting for a business model to arrive. And then they're like, great, you've got a business model and I can scale it. Right? So what's happened to venture capital and investing in the last number of years is that you have this massive run of capital that's out there with a bunch of clueless people who've never actually built businesses running funds, right? And so then they're like, oh, I want to mitigate my risk. And so I want to be on this growth side where you've got a scalable business, not in the value creation, the business model creation side, right? So part of what you have to ask yourself is, where are you? To me, the question with funding has to do with, what do you think you're using funding for? If you think you're using funding for this part to create you don't have a business model. Let's just say, you know very well if you have a business model that works right now, or you're in the valley of death. You know that, right? Because if you're still like, well, I don't know about this, and how do we get to the customer, and that, you don't have a business model yet. It hasn't all clicked together, right? So if you're in that process and you're going to introduce somebody who is like, hey, I'm just waiting for this thing to scale, then you're going to be stuck in their world. They're going to force you to pretend you're over here when you're actually over here, right? You have to be congruent with your reality, right? So in terms of a bootstrap mindset of this, you have to painfully wait and endure this pain that's before you get a business model. And even if you do want that, even when you get to that place where you have a business model, do you really want capital, right? Again, why are you doing this business? What is the point of capital? You think capital comes for free? No, no, no. Capital comes with a, hey, give me my return. Where's my return? Whether it's we expect 5%, it's a time-based process, right? So now you're on a treadmill. If you take $50 million, that means that I expect as an investor, or $1 billion or a much bigger return. Now your venture and you and the whole journey is now forced into this unnatural act of having to grow at an incredible pace, or at least by the pace that they expect, which might or might not have anything to do with your venture and where it's at, right? So bringing those people into your venture and bringing those kinds of structural realities is going to then force your venture to try to pretend to be somewhere where it's not. Now, if those things line up and you happen to be in the stage where you actually have a business model and you get capital and you're growing, then sure, everybody is quote unquote happy. But then they're going to want an exit. And did you start this business to exit it, or do you start this business to do it for yourself, right? What are your motivations? And if you don't understand that up front, then you're going to just make a set of choices. For example, getting involved. There's no way I will ever get involved with venture capitalists, right? Not because I don't think venture capitalists don't do important things in the world. They do what they do. It's just that the way that they want to set up their life, their metrics of success are not mine. Right? So therefore, I don't want to bring somebody into my world who's going to pollute it. And I don't mean pollute it because theirs is pollution. It's pollution because if I know myself, then I know what I need and who I need on my journey, right? If I don't know myself, then I'm going to make up a story. I'm going to be easily influenced by a bunch of other people who say, this is what you really want. You really want the Ferrari and the big house. I'm like, I don't care about a big house and a Ferrari, but you should really want that because that's success, right? But I don't really want that. I grew up in one of the most capitalist societies in the world, where everybody in Hong Kong, where everybody, wears fancy clothes. I never thought that was important, right? And so me running around chasing a goal to set up my business or my life based on some external reality, right? It's the same thing with venture capital, and it's the same thing with any kind of investor, right? They have an agenda. They have a structural reality. They have a customer, right? A venture capitalist has a customer. It's someone they promised a return, a very high return in a fixed amount of time, usually 10 to 12 years, right? Angel investors are different, though. That's a much more complex breed to deal with, because a lot of people who are angel investors are dealing with legacy issues. I'm close to death. I have to have significance and meaning in my life. So I'm going to invest in entrepreneurs and help them on their journey. Okay, maybe, right? I mean, I never was an entrepreneur. I was working a corporate gig. Now I've got money to spend. I want to get a taste of the entrepreneurial journey. So I'm going to go and invest in company. These are all the motivations you have to understand before you bring somebody into your journey, right? You have to understand what is running their stuff, what is running their show. And it's okay, because everybody gets to run their show. Like, that's the beauty of the world we live in today. I don't have to be living in your show. I can run my own reality TV show and enjoy my own existence, right? But the minute you bring somebody,
this on that very point right there, I think I mean, one of the things that I just love about interacting with Bijoy, and it's one of the reasons that as drinking buddies, we have stayed up to 4 and 5 in the morning on a 6 p.m. start to all the way through. I always learn something myself about this. Bijoy, what I'd like to do is just from the sake of time and making sure that we try to deliver on our promise and keeping these kind of in a certain time frame from the standpoint of everyone having things to do. I'm going to ask Bijoy to come back, because I know that he's always popular, because especially for virus times have a strong similarity. They're not the same, but they have a strong similarity to the birth of Bootstrap Boston, and 2009 timeframe. 2008 kind of set the table, and 2009, 2010 were kind of the time to do that. Bijoy, what I'll do is I'm going to go over a wrap of the times. I want to make sure I invite y'all to one other thing that's coming soon, and then I'm going to invite Bijoy to come back again about specifically about the journey. Sorry to interrupt, Bijoy, but this is one of those times that, since you and I haven't gotten to do it in a while, we would stay up to 4 o'clock in the morning We already have Jay Lee in South Korea staying up to 2 o'clock in the morning. And so we'll raise our glasses in Jay's general direction to just
let me make a suggestion, Kevin, as well. If there's, I'm happy to stick around for. I know you guys, people have time constraints. If someone wants to stick around in this call, I'm happy to stick around and
yeah, and we can certainly do that.
The post call conversation, just because I'm sure people will have some reactions and thoughts, disagreements, and so on and so forth. And some people have gotten what they need to out of the main call, and then we can kind of have the denouement of the drinking session.
Yeah,
we can continue that after the call.
I'll go over some of the points, and then everyone stick around if you'd like. I actually have to go back to my National Science Foundation event myself, so because I'm spending your tax dollars.
We don't need you. We don't need you, Kevin. We're good. Thanks for setting it up.
Let me do this. Just the first thing that I heard in the series, kind of like I did last time, and what we're going to be doing is part of the show notes that we'll have on these calls are going to actually kind of establish some of the show notes around this. Bijoy might throw in a few when we do the final edit on this. But the first one is the whole notion of the valley of death and recognizing where you're at in the entrepreneurial journey. Second thing, be congruent with your reality. Now, one of the things that was a good thing about reflecting on the valley of death was this idea of congruency. The third thing is recognize the mental constructs that you have. Recognize them, whatever they might be. Fourth thing, when he was talking about reality TV, you can't just will yourself out of reality. And so be aware of that. Will alone doesn't take you out of that, especially if your mental constructs are in the way. Fifth thing, history, learn it or repeat it. Sixth thing, mental hygiene to overcome your mental constructs. He actually talked about how he was rejecting Elon Musk's Twitter feed just from a standpoint of, have my own mental hygiene, just as I might wash my hands in virus times. How am I washing my mind to actually take care of it? Seventh thing, programming. Remember that we're pro-social, and that's got an upside that we work together in community, but also it's got a downside that we feel like we have to puff up. How are you doing? Oh, just killing it. Eighth thing, nature and other issues like that are forces that don't stop. So don't fight them, work with them, adapt. Ninth thing, entrepreneurship and creating new, the whole role of the way that Bijoy is defining entrepreneur is the role of the individual who creates the new business model, not the small business person. He gave us an example of, one coffee shop and another coffee shop and another coffee shop. It's the small business person, but the entrepreneur is creating new business models, and to recognize that. 10th thing, solve the entrepreneur's problem for yourself first, not the customer first. I kind of like that tension because most everyone else says you got to go solve the customer's problem. In fact, in the program that we're doing with the NSF, everyone's like, you got to focus on the customer. I love the idea that the entrepreneur first, that Bijoy is saying. 11th thing, don't buy into other entrepreneurs' journey. Choose your own. 12th thing, the California story. Remember when we eat the California story by reading Entrepreneur Magazine or however you get your news, that's just 1% of the story. And don't follow that story. Don't blindly follow that story for yourself. 13th thing, discover yourself. He said, discover yourself, know yourself, deconstruct. Who are you? Who is Bijoy? Who is Kevin? Who is Jay? Who is Courtney? 14th thing, the myth of the entrepreneur, and I think I've fallen and have bled because of this. Don't do it all yourself. Don't do it all. It's a myth. It's a myth. No one person can actually do it. There's not one entrepreneur that has actually figured out everything, all him or herself. And then the 15th thing, make your choices clear. Be clear about what you want, because it's your journey. And, just the reminder that it's your life, it's your journey. Bijoy has seen me, I have many of these notebooks. I've been doing a patent notebook since 1988, but I have many of these notebooks that the pages alone are actually directly out of his mouth. So, the main thing what we'll do is we'll keep the conversation going. I am going to actually hop off really quick and try to join the last few minutes of the thing that I'm spending your tax dollars on. Actually, your tax dollars are paying me right now for helping on this other situation. And there will be some learning from that we'll bring into this program as well, because there's some interesting stuff that's happening with really advanced technologies and stuff like that. I'll tell you about that at a different time. But Bijoy, I'm going to hop off. I hate to do it, but because I would love to have yet another drink with you and sit here and actually learn. A reminder real quick that next week, and Kristen, I'm not sure if she's going to be able to stick around or not, but she might remind us next week as well that next week is the Discover Russia program. So we do have the Eurasia Foundation has funded a program where part of what we're doing is connecting entrepreneurs from Russia with entrepreneurs. It's mainly Central Texas and what I've been calling Central Russia, but I've been told, been corrected. Central Russia is not, is considered around Moscow. This is actually around Siberia, around a state in a city called Tumen. But it's available for anyone that's Russian speaking. We will have simultaneous translation next week. We're going to actually have a number of entrepreneurs that are actually going to speak back and forth about this. We have an expert that will actually talk about discovering Russia. There will be a number of other programs like this. If you want to read more about it, go to techranch.com/events and just look at our calendar. For the summer, Kristen, as program manager of Venture Outfitter, and myself have agreed that part of what we want to do is we want to make the series of programs available to you as entrepreneurs and to your colleagues. So if there's anyone else, we will have core other programs that are for paid programs, but this interaction every Thursday at 11 o'clock Texas time, we are making that available for free to anyone that would like to participate in it, with a bias towards entrepreneurs. Entrepreneurs are people who are stepping on the entrepreneurial journey. That's fine. Probably won't be as relevant for people that are just, that are clear that they just want jobs. But part of what I want to do is crack that open wide because of what's happening and how we can actually support it. We'll kind of have the theme of around innovating from the ashes. Innovating from the ashes. 30 million people in this country alone just lost their jobs. There's a lot of ashes. How do you actually do that? How do you actually, as one of my advisors says, Holly Tukowski, as my advisor, friend, and one of the Venture Forth instructors has said many times, sometimes you have to build using broken tools. And we'll talk about that. Most of the speakers that are going to be around that in the coming 12 weeks will be around that. And it will be a weekly program. Love to have you involved in it. We'll have a way of submitting some questions before and after. With that, Kristen, really quick, is there anything that needs to be said before we hand things back to Bijoy and I step away?
I just wanted to reiterate that if you are registered for today's event, you are registered for the free event through the summer. And in your confirmation email, you can add it to your Google Calendar or whatever calendar you use so that you have the links readily available in your calendar for the rest of the series throughout the summer. So that was just a little technical thing for the people who registered.
That's perfect. Well, I tell you what, because of this format, we're experimenting a lot. Bijoy was just sending me a note as well. I'm always open to your feedback about how we should actually structure this stuff, because part of what we want to do is build a net that's big enough to, just like what happened, a little bit more than a decade ago, about how do we build community, because the number one thing that a lot of times Bijoy talks about the individual's journey. I like to talk about the community, because entrepreneurs, the only safety net that we really have as entrepreneurs, even in this country, is each other. So so part of what that is, a call from y'all to me to say, give me feedback, the good, the bad, and the ugly. The great thing is the people I see right here have all at least kicked me at least once. That's great. And I love it, by the way. I'm a glutton. But part of what we want to do is really start building this community up, because I think it's really needed more than ever before. All right, well, I tell you what, I am going to step away. Thanks, Bijoy. You're welcome to stick around, and y'all take good care, and we'll catch you soon.
Thanks, Kevin. Yeah, and everybody, just no obligation, obviously, but this is the drinking part of the conversation where we can go back and forth a little bit, and I'm guessing folks will fall off, and those that want to, I'd love to hear your thoughts and something that's, I try to throw some stuff into the thing so it gets your mind going, and then you have a reaction, and then we can kind of tussle something out where we can work something out that's specific to where you're at. So happy to stick around for that.
In the future, if it wasn't the NSF, I would have definitely been able to. Usually I have a bucket of time myself. It's just in the future. I think
that's fine. I think that's what's cool about a structure. And in Bootstrap meetings, we would have sort of 30 minutes before we have our beers and drink. And that's actually very valuable time where people are gathering and talking and just kind of coming into the conversation. Then you have the sort of section where you're kind of getting some content, and then there's sort of, again, back to the social time. So, that structure is part of there's no reason that can't kind of continue here digitally while we're forced to be in this digital.
Yes. Kevin, rest assured, we can live without you.
Sounds good.
That's right. Thanks, Kevin. Bye.
Guys. Bye.